This is Heads Up, where we explore the challenges, opportunities, and trends inside today's highest performing supply chain operations. Now to our host, CEO of Mountain Leverage, Alex Reneman.
Hello, I'm Alex Reneman, and with me today is Ilias Simpson. Ilias leads bpost Parcels and Logistics North America Division, which includes bpost subsidiaries like Radial, Apple Express, FDM, Landmark Global, and the Mail Group. When I first met Ilias, he held the position as Senior Vice President of Fulfillment Services at Radial, where he led Radial's nationwide operations for fulfillment, network optimization, engineering, continuous improvement, project management. So Ilias has got some great experience, and in my opinion, a perfect guest for our program. So Ilias, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Alex. I'm very excited to speak with you this afternoon. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, I did my best of trying to explain what you do and what everything's about. So can you just take a moment and tell us a little bit about Radial, bpost, your role? That way we can kind of know where we're going, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So bpost is is essentially the Belgian postal service. And over the years, they've been transforming the company and acquiring companies really all over the world in an effort to offset the declining mail business and continue to transform their organization. And so one of the acquisitions that they made back in 2017 was Radial. And I was with Radial at the time as a vice president. And so they've acquired a few companies in North America. Radial, the other ones that you mentioned, Radial is the largest. But they essentially needed someone to lead those North American businesses. So I lead the North American businesses for Radial. Each business operates a little bit differently. We've got, a cross-border business with Landmark, and we've got a final mile business with Apple Express. And each business has a CEO that reports into me, except for Radial, where I serve as the CEO of Radial for that organization.
Gotcha.
But the focus of what we do, Alex, is e-commerce. We are an e-commerce provider for various brands, mostly high-end fashion and cosmetic brands. So a lot of your household names, companies like Payless, Hibbett Sports, Untuckit, that we do the e-commerce fulfillment, call center operations, as well as the shipping and logistics for, and the technology solutions as well.
Yeah, great. So that service, obviously, and we'll just pull the Band-Aid right, jump right into the pandemic. I mean, yeah. I don't want to make light of it. Yeah, obviously there's all kinds of things affected. Everything's affected, but your business, this business model, supply chain in general, but certainly what you guys do had to be affected by the pandemic. So how has it affected your customers, your business model, omni-channel operations, wherever you see kind of its most impact in terms of what you do on a day in, day out basis?
Yeah. The pandemic was obviously has been very interesting because obviously we're still in the midst of it. But first and foremost, it impacted us in the fact that we have 10,000 employees across North America that we had to figure out how we were going to keep them safe and keep them working and keep product flowing. So that was kind of the first step for us was making sure that we could safely operate and put people in a position where they could still do their jobs. And so we had to be really creative around what we were doing within our fulfillment centers and within our call centers. So we put in some work from home models and things like that to help us be successful on the call center side. And then in the fulfillment side, we had to leverage technology and other things. But so we're dealing with that. And then on top of that, e-commerce goes through the roof because stores are closed and everything. So basically we're in a situation where we're trying to figure out how to keep people safe and distance and all these other things in the middle of basically a peak, right? So our volume in Q2 of last year when the pandemic hit was up 62% year over year. So I mean, we literally went from 0 to 100, not quite zero, but you get the point. We went from 0 to 100 with the pandemic, and it's continued. I mean, we're still seeing heavy online volumes pretty much across the board, and what it's led to is a shift for a lot of our brands and a lot of our customers who have said, they were going to go down this path anyway. And so some have accelerated and said, you know what, this now time to bring our e-commerce strategy forward and start taking advantage of that channel. So for a lot of customers, we went from almost an afterthought or a secondary channel to we're now the primary channel and the primary focus for their consumers.
Yeah, I mean that growth is amazing, and we see statistics all the time. But when it happens in your business, and it's a peak that stays there, it's pegged and it just stays. How did you guys handle that? I mean, that's rapid growth in business, but also in the people you have to have and all that. What were some of the things? How did you guys handle all that?
Yeah, so we had to get really creative. Like I said, on the call center side, we leveraged the work from home model, which was huge for us. We would not have made it on the call center side without that. And so luckily, between our IT teams and our call center teams, we were able to quickly put a model like that in place, and that allowed us to ramp up. And in an environment where people aren't necessarily comfortable going into a building all the time, that really made a difference for us on that side. On the fulfillment side, over the years, we've really been working on our utilization and our technology and other things within the fulfillment centers. And so it actually timed out where, the pandemic from a volume perspective was a good thing for our fulfillment centers to start putting some of those things into practice, right? So, the interesting thing about it is typically we kind of have these spikes in our business, and, you're kind of going up and down and up and down. Well, when you can just stay up for a while, it actually provides some synergies and some makes things a little bit easier to some degree, right? You're not onboarding and offboarding people. You just have to keep people a little longer. But we also had to get creative with things like pop-up buildings, where we basically would take either take down some empty space or find empty space in a building to pop up an additional customer in and use that as like a second node for distributing their product. Obviously, we leveraged automation. So we have a great partnership with Locus Robotics, and we scaled up from a couple dozen robots to a couple hundred robots with them in our Kentucky facilities. So again, and we had to do that with all of our partners, where we basically we had to scale up. But for us, the good thing is that we're used to that through peaks over the years, as you know, and so we were just able to scale up and stay up for an extended period of time.
Yeah, that's a good point. That seasonal rush, all of a sudden's up, and it's, hey, okay, now we just drive. I know it's not that simple, but it is different. So I always like to ask everybody, there's prognosticators all over the map on this stuff, but what trends do you see that are going to kind of stick around, or what trends do you see emerging after? I mean, it's a heck of an experience across the world, but what trends do you see that you think, these are coming, or these are going to stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like buy online and pick up in store are starting to pick up momentum, and I think that'll stick, and I think that'll just continue to grow. Things like curbside pickup. It's interesting. I shared in another session that we've been doing curbside pickup for years. And people kind of thought of that like, why would you offer a curbside pickup service? And but now that's become a popular thing. And so I think just I think people were hesitant to do some of those things in the past, and now the convenience of it, of being able to not have to get out your car and run in the store, but just pull up to a parking spot and tell them your number and have your product brought to you. So I definitely think some of the omni-channel things like buy online and pick up in store and curbside pickup will stick around. I think more companies are going to shift to an e-commerce strategy overall. Definitely those who were already heavily invested in their e-commerce strategy benefited during this time versus those who hadn't quite built out that strategy. I don't think stores will go away, but I think stores will be utilized differently. I think stores are becoming more of almost like a showroom. Best Buy did that model years ago, where they basically said, hey, look, you come into the store to see everything, but when you want to buy something, you've got to either order it online or in the store and come back and get it later. So I think that, even more companies are going to go that route in terms of using their stores differently. And then I think just from a work perspective, I think some of the things that happened as a result of social distancing and people working from home, I think some of those will stick, more virtual meetings. I think that'll be a common thing in the workplace. And I think that, for us, our call center work from home model will stick around, right? Like that's something that, we'll always have physical call centers, saying that there all be stores, but we're definitely trying to leverage that model as much as possible.
Well, I'll tell you, being a remote company, and have been from the beginning, so 16 years of that, the tools in the last 12 months, the tools have massively gone, like, all right, bonus benefit to us for that. Hey, so another trend, I don't know what we call it a trend or not, but when we look back over this year, and look, there are lots of ways you and I may define ourselves, and
Right.
none of them are singular. You may be a father, a husband, a son, a brother, you're a CEO, all these things, as am I. One of the things that certainly is something where we define one another in this world today is race. And in that case, you're a black guy and I'm a white guy.
Right.
And so that's something that's different. And we all know race is a context, and there's creation and all that. We could have all that conversation at some point, but I wanted to pull you in and talk about what oftentimes can be super uncomfortable. But I wanted to get your perspective on race and diversity in the workplace, and specifically in our industry. And I looked at some of the statistics. Leaders of color are clearly at a shortage in, comparatively speaking. Again, we have societal changes or challenges that people across the nation and the world are wrestling with and challenging with. But for the Wall Street Journal, I saw, out of the chief executives running America's top 500 companies, less than 1% are black. And among all U.S. companies with 100 or more employees, so black folks hold only around 3% of executive and senior level roles. And so I look at that and I go, whoa, okay. And so I just, what do you see are some of the organizational challenges that are leading to this disparity in our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's a good call out, and it can be a difficult topic at times, as you mentioned. But I think it's an important topic, and it's something that, unfortunately, as much progress as we've made as a country and as a people, we haven't really made progress in that. And if you read a lot of articles around the Fortune 500, for example, that number of black executives hasn't really moved in years, and so it's still a challenge. I think the biggest piece of it is, there's a couple of things for me. It all starts with unconscious bias, right? And what I've experienced in my career is that when you don't, and it's almost a chicken and egg thing, but when you don't have diversity, you don't get diversity. And what I mean by that is, I think oftentimes, you maybe have like a white man leading a business, and he hires people that look like him, and so what you end up with is a non-diverse workforce. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think anybody's actually out there, there probably are some, but I think in a lot of cases it's just unconscious bias and people hiring, because we all like to hire people that remind us of ourselves, right? Like, as through years of interviewing and all the interviewing training, they tell you to watch out for that, right? But that's what we do. We tend to hire people like ourselves, and so I think there's a lot of unconscious bias that leads into it. And then what you end up with is a situation where once you have that lack of diversity, you've now created a situation where diverse candidates don't feel welcome, right? So I always share that one of the first things I've always done when I looked at a company I was considering joining or wanting to know more about is I would look at their executive team on their website, and if it was an all-white executive team on the website, that was a sign to me that I may not be welcome. And so again, that those companies are I'm sure aren't intentionally doing that, but that's a side effect of not having a focus on diversity. And from what I've experienced over my career, and I've been somewhat fortunate, Alex, in the fact that a lot of my leaders and senior leaders over the years have been minorities, whether women or African American, something of the sort, and have brought me along. And so that's opened up some doors for me, but there's not enough of that, and that's part of what we're going to have to break down. But I think companies really have to think about, what are you doing to actually attract that minority talent, and what are you doing to attract Black leaders and make sure that they know they're welcome at your organization, and that they could have potential within your organization.
Are you seeing any trends that are regarding diversity and inclusion in our industry or beyond that are working?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, obviously with the events in 2020 and some of the things that were going around social justice, social injustice, there's been a lot more focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've been putting a lot more focus on our side. I think the biggest thing you can do is educate. And I think that a lot of organizations have started having conversations, listening sessions, putting together employee resource groups and getting feedback, and just understanding how people feel and hearing what some of those exclusionary activities that you're doing as an organization are, so that you can start to address them. And then I think also a lot of organizations are, and I think it's something you have to be careful with, but unfortunately, you do have to be deliberate. And so a lot of organizations are putting some hard numbers around what they're going to do in terms of addressing the diversity in their leadership teams. And so I think those trends are working. But I think, for me, you wish it could be organic, but I don't think that obviously that doesn't work always. And so I think you have to be deliberate about it. You've got to be conscious about it. And like I said, I think the education, the focus on diversity hiring, and most importantly, talking to the people within your organization, and talking to the diverse people within your organization to understand their perspective is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's really good stuff. Let's talk about the why it's important. And I want to share some, and I want to be super careful because I'm not sharing an equivalency, but I think fundamentally there are some similarities enough that make sense. And where I'm going with that is the idea of appreciating someone of difference. And it's something I've learned in my path that I don't always do it well, but I try to appreciate the differences. And in our company, we've done a great job, I think, of having strong women leaders in our company, but we have not done a fantastic job on people of color, and we just haven't. And so it's one of those things. But when I look at it, I look back in our history, and I remember. So I come from a small town in West Virginia. Hillbilly, I talk like a hillbilly. I there's things I say, there's colloquialisms, all those things fit in. And I remember people asking me, hey, West Virginia, technology company in West Virginia, what are you doing? And I remember answering things almost being apologetic, saying, well, it's a great place to raise a family. It's wonderful. I say the stress level's so, I once I'm done traveling on my phone, I'm in an area where everybody's nice and all that. That's all very true. But what I realized several years ago is, in fact, that's really a strength. I can turn that into a strength. I'm not saying it's necessarily always an advantage, because there is a disadvantage to not being like everybody else. And again, not an equivalency of minority, but what I've been able to do, I've turned around and said, wait a minute, I grew up in a town where tenacity, grit, collaboration, helping neighbors, all these things I learned. I looked at my company and I thought, this is who we are. We actually drew strength from having that difference. Now, again, want to be clear, that's very different than, when you and I walk in a room, people see two different folks. And if I don't say a word, they don't know I'm a hillbilly, right? By looking at it. So, but it's kind of a two-part question. I say that to say there's a reason to hire. It's not just let's quota up and let's do a PR stunt and let's do these things. There's actually a strategic value, a strength to hiring minorities. So let me ask you a two-part question, and you can hit it however and whatever direction you want. One from a company perspective, and that's largely folks that are listening are leaders and companies to this recording. But why might company leaders see leaders of color as a strategic advantage as opposed to an accommodation or a quota or whatever else? And the second part question, at any point you want to add in, if someone's listening right now and they're a minority, what can they, a professional of color, if you will, consider to make their own successful path in industries like you and others have done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tackle the first part first. As an organization, I think, there's been plenty of data that proves that diversity within your organization leads to increased profitability, increased efficiency, increased productivity, all these different things. And I think you hit on why, Alex. It's the diversity of thought that comes with diversity. When you have people of different backgrounds and different mindsets and from different cultures, they look at different situations differently. And so you and I approach a problem in two completely different ways based on our life experiences. So by having all of those different points of view and those different perspectives, you bring diversity of thought to the leadership team, and with diversity of thought comes innovation. So for me, that's the key. Is you want diversity of thought within the organization, and you want to drive innovation through that diversity of thought. You have to be very cautious of groupthink, right? Like, you don't want to get into a situation where as a leader of an organization, you hire a bunch of people like you, and now you're in a situation where you guys are all thinking the same way and you're all doing the same things, and that can be dangerous.
Quick way to get caught. That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think bringing on, leaders of all different backgrounds and bringing on leaders of color and bringing on women in leadership, you bring a different perspective, which leads to diversity of thought, and that drives benefits for the business, and drives creativity. And then I just think, obviously as more organizations focus on that, as you think about partnerships and organizations that you want to work with and being able to draw the best talent, diversity becomes important as well, right? One thing I always tell people is, I've always tried to have a pretty diverse leadership team, but I've never had to put out quotas or specific targets. What I do is I hire the best talent out there. And, if you hire the best talent out there, you'll end up with diverse talent, because it's, the best talent isn't all white women or all white men or all black men or all black women. It's the best talent comes from all different backgrounds and all different areas. And so if you just focus on hiring the best talent, you'll end up with a diverse workforce, in my opinion. And again, you'll have that diversity of thought, you'll have those different perspectives, and you'll be better off as an organization. And then you'll have the people, having diversity in leadership is important because, and this kind of answers the second part of the question. For somebody like me, early in my career, I left an organization because I didn't see any leaders of color. And I felt like nobody was saying it to me that I couldn't be a senior leader within that organization. But I formed that opinion myself based on what I saw within the organization.
Context.
And so I moved on to a different organization. And so that company lost, in my mind, a good talent, right? So obviously I'm biased, but they missed out on the opportunity to groom some talent because they weren't focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm a big believer that it has to work both ways, right? So as leaders of organizations, we have to enable it for sure. But to your second question, as a leader of color, you also have to, or as a professional of color, you also have to try to find ways to, one, bring others up. You've got to find people, you've got to find mentors, you've got to find people that you can network with. I think one of the best things you can do is get a mentor of a different race, right? Like, or mentor someone of a different race. That really helps to start building some of those relationships and start looking at things a little bit differently. But I would definitely say that as a Black professional, networking is really important. I would also say that there's realities, and you're going to be the minority in a lot of cases for the foreseeable future. This is not going to go away overnight, and what you can't do is let that be a discouragement. Right. Because, we were having this conversation as an executive team the other day. We are not going to all of a sudden become, a 70%, minority organization overnight. And I'm not saying that that's where we want to go, but so while you're on that journey, you're still going to have these folks who are the minority in that business. And so as a person of color, you're going to be the minority for the foreseeable future, and you've got to be comfortable with that, and you've got to learn how to work with that, and you've got to not let that discourage you, and you've got to be able to speak up within your organization and find people within your organization and share your perspective. I think that's really important, because people don't know how you feel if you don't tell them, right? And some advice I got early in my career from an African American leader. He said to me, he was a COO at a large Fortune 500 company I was at. He said to me, we were talking about performance management one time. He asked me if I had created a career plan for myself. And I told him that, sorry, my dogs are barking.
another 2020.
Yeah, another trend from working from home. So I told him that that my manager hadn't created one for me yet. And he said, listen, manage your career or someone else will. And so for me, I've always taken it as, you have to take some ownership over your own career. So
yeah, it's funny, Elias, that it's so much more acceptable now for dogs to bark, kids to come in, whatever. When we started this company, I was telling you, we were remote from the beginning, and I was always nervous, like, what's going on in noise, because no one else was doing it. Now it's like, oh yeah, it's my dog. That's this, that's that. Oh, I got a postman at the door, or whatever. It's great. So we can keep on going, man. I think that's really good advice. Your manager gave you. You manage your career, or somebody else will. It's fantastic advice. I want to go back to what you were saying about the recruitment and retention. So let's say someone's listening right now, and they're like, yeah, I want more people of color, more minorities, more inclusivity in my company on a leadership perspective. But how do I do this? I mean, I'm buying into this, but I see the competitive advantage. What's some advice you can give them? Because I usually, go recruit the best people. We try to do that, but to your point, your circles are going to be largely circles look like you. And again, I look at our company. We've done a great job. I think we've had some really strong female companies. We've got minorities here or there, but
Right.
I just look at our company. We're not as diverse as I'd like to be, candidly.
Yeah.
So what are some advice? What's some advice you can offer to folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things you can do. I mean, I think one, you can leverage your network, right? So you can leverage, if you can reach out to, if you don't have enough, diverse leadership within your organization, reach out to others who do have it, and maybe try to tap into their networks to see if you can't recruit some of the talent through them. I think that's definitely one thing you can do. I think there's always the kind of traditional thing of, targeting some different organizations and targeting, HBCUs and things like that to try to drum up some talent. But I think really what you have to do, and it's something that really I just started to understand even this year, is, there's things that we do in the way we recruit and in where we recruit, and even in what we put in a job posting that can be exclusionary. And so I think, as you think about how to attract diverse talent, you have to think about what you're saying, how you're trying to draw these people in, the requirements you're creating, all of these different things, to try to draw in the diverse talent. And so, even the way you describe where your company's located, right? Like you want to make sure that, if you have we talk about, for example, if we have a facility that's in a predominantly white area, we want to make sure that in the job posting that we also mention maybe some of the surrounding areas, right? Because if I'm a minority candidate and I know that I'm going to have to move to this location, and I look up the city or the town that the site's in, and it's a 97% white town, all of a sudden I'm not interested in this job posting. However, if you list the 3 surrounding cities or the 3 surrounding counties or whatever, and there's some diversity in those counties, then all of a sudden now I'm like, oh, you know what, I could go there because maybe there's some diversity from those towns at this company, and maybe I can live in those areas, those types of things. So
yeah, you might be willing to be the minority at work, but not the minority when you go home. You'd rather at least have one end
so,
that's working for you. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so, those are little things that, like, even I, until we really started down this journey last year, even I, didn't really understand and didn't think about. I experienced them. Like, I've been that person looking at a job posting and saying, oh, you know what, this probably wouldn't work for me, or looking at a company's website and saying, oh, you know what, this company doesn't have any Black people, that kind of thing. But I'd never thought about being on the other side and thinking, how do I make my company more attractive to that diverse talent? And there's ways you can do that. I mean, imagery matters, who's on your website, and the pictures you're using, and those different things matter. And the words matter for sure. The words definitely matter. And I think that, working with some experts in that space is never a bad thing to help you think about how you use more inclusive language and more inclusive imagery and everything that you're doing to attract talent. And then I think also being open and authentic, right? Like, to me, that's the best thing you can do. I mean, for me, the being willing to, as a leader, as a white man, as you're doing, to be able to have these conversations and to be able to say, hey, we want diverse talent, but I don't know how to get it. And, being able to have these conversations, that that in and of itself can help as well, because I think when people see that authenticity and they know that they're going to feel welcomed, that makes them more willing to go into those roles. So I think as much as you can get your own voice out there, and as much as you can get, your personality out there in terms of trying to attract talent, that's going to help bring on diverse talent for sure.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I'm kind of picturing a mental imagery, and I hate this may not be completely accurate, but I love the way when you hear about this, oftentimes comes up quotas and things like that, and that always says, well, now you're a token, or now you're not better than everybody else. You're looking to fill again, and that always is a bad taste in my mouth. I think lots of people's mouths. But I love the way you're putting. I'm like, instead of seeking a quota, you're seeking the best. And if you're only fishing in one pond, you got to broaden your net to catch the best. And I love that idea, and I love that perspective. But you have to be deliberate about doing that, about making sure you're casting the net broad and wide, or far and wide. I love that. I think that's really good. So if and then, no one, I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah, no,
if you had, man, if I just handed you the magic wand saying, this is what could change in the next few years in our industry to really just really bring up diversity and inclusivity in our industry, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is, I said it earlier, more education. I really feel like we need more education in our industry around diversity. We're not attracting, our industry doesn't attract people of color. It just doesn't. And I think that, today, African-American kids who are going to college are not majoring in supply chain or engineering or those things because they don't feel like that's a field that they can break into. And so I think what we need to do is we need to be, working with universities and working with, Black alumni associations and, Black MBA associations to go out there and put our name out there as companies to attract some of this talent. And then we need to be encouraging and supporting African Americans into programs like engineering, supply chain, and those other things. Because if you just look at the pipeline, if you will, if you don't have the pipeline, you're never going to fill the roles, right? And the pipeline is really those students and those people in programs. So if the universities don't have enough Black engineering students, then you're not going to end up with enough Black leaders in supply chain. If they don't have enough Black supply chain students, you're not going to end up with enough Black leaders in supply chain. And so it really starts with that pipeline. I'll give a good example. I had a buddy who was doing his PhD in engineering, and he thought about dropping out of the program. And the university president called him in and said, "Hey, you can't drop out of this program because it'll affect our numbers too significantly." And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I don't want to mess the university's numbers up." And he said, No. He said, "I don't mean the university." He said, "There's so few Black PhD engineers that you will mess up the numbers for the country." He's like, "You're literally one of, a handful."
No pressure.
Yeah, exactly. He said, "You're literally one of a handful of Black people that are going to get a PhD in engineering this year." So it's one of those things where, if we don't build the pipeline up, then we're not going to end up with enough people in leadership. Same thing with MBA programs, right? Like when you look at the diversity within MBA programs, it's getting better, but there's still definitely an opportunity there. And I think a lot of organizations need to be working with like the Black MBA Association and some of these other, like I said, Black alumni groups to try to drum up some talent. Oftentimes Black people end up in roles that they're overqualified for because they have to be overqualified to get attention sometimes. So we really need to be drumming up this talent through those programs.
Yeah, education, demand, pipeline, broadening the net. These are all good. I mean, if anyone is listening now or watching, depending on what media you're consuming this, man, there's a lot of good stuff, Elias, and certainly, if I think right now, if somebody's interested in broadening their diversity within their company, you've given some great stuff. I appreciate it. I do have a couple more questions for you, just kind of more general in nature. I love the advice you offered. I always love for any wisdom I can pull out of any guest we have on here. And so what's a book, a podcast, any kind of knowledge source, something that you've found that's been extremely valuable to you in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I love the book StrengthsFinders.
Okay.
For me, that's always been a book that I've, it was one that I read and it just really resonated with me. And I ask my teams to read it. I think too often we focus on the things that we're not good at versus the things that we are good at. And that book really talks a lot about that. I think about being a former athlete. I always think about in sports, you're allowed to have specialists, right? Like you don't ask your receiver to make tackles. You ask your receiver to catch the ball because that's what they're good at. Right? So I think StrengthsFinders is an incredible book. I also love Colin Powell's book and his 13 Rules of Leadership. The book's called It Worked for Me. It's a fantastic book about leadership, and it's a fantastic book about a person of color who did unbelievable things in leadership in an environment where you wouldn't have thought it was possible, and coming from where he came from. So I think for if you're looking for inspiration, whether you're white, Black, or otherwise, Colin Powell's book It Worked for Me is a fantastic book about someone who overcame a lot of adversity and really made a way for himself as a leader. And he talks about being an African-American leader in the military and as he worked his way up through the ranks, how that felt and what that was like being the only, African-American general in the room or the only African-American senior leader in the room. So.
Yeah, no, those are both great. And one of the things that to kind of end on, I'd love to ask you. I found maybe this again go back to the upbringing. Gratitude is almost a superpower for me and always has been. And I just like to ask you what whether it's in the midst of the pandemic or whatever. I mean, what is it you're most grateful or even hopeful for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that I'm grateful for my family first and foremost, right? Like, I mean, I think I was literally talking with I'm a part of a president's organization. I was talking with one of the gentlemen in the organization about how our families enable us to do this job. As you know, it can be demanding. We can work, we can work around the clock at times. And so, my wife's super supportive and has been great in that way. And I have 2 young daughters who are awesome. And what I'm hopeful about is that, I see them interacting and I see them at school, and I feel like we're getting better. It's easy to focus on the things that that are going wrong in the world, but I'm a believer that you have to focus on the positive sometimes too. And I really feel like we're doing a lot of good things, and there's been a lot of good progress, and it's not where it needs to be, and we're not where we need to be, but we do have reason to be hopeful for the future. And you talk about women in leadership. There's just Roz Brewer was just named as CEO of Walgreens, and so we've got a Black woman in the Fortune 500. So having two Black daughters, that's encouraging, right? And so we just need to continue to make small steps and continue to make progress.
Yeah, awesome.
And the vaccines are starting to get out, so that's great.
There's some hope. Yep, that's right. Awesome. Ilias Simpson, man, you've been a great guest. I really appreciate you coming on. I think this has been fantastic. Thank you. Good luck with all you're doing, and maybe we'll have you back again soon, and we can rip on any other topic we've got going on out there.
Absolutely. Alex, I really appreciate you having me. It was great. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ilias. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Heads Up, a Mountain Leverage production with your host, Alex Reneman. Be sure to subscribe to catch future episodes as we dive into all things logistics and optimization.